Even through the ups and downs, praises and criticisms, there's something about McFarlane Toys that still wants me to check out exactly what they're willing to put out that's outside of the spectrum of Batman and DC characters, should that license be passed on to the likes of Mattel sometime in the midway point of 2026. And I feel like I wanted to sort of start planting that seed with certain releases, very special occasions, collaborations, and the like, of which McFarlane is going to take part in. I feel like this is a pretty good starting point. Not to be confused with Berserk, the manga, because I was honestly getting both of those confused. I had to kind of indoctrinate myself into believing that Berserk is the manga and BRZRKR, without the vowels, is the brand new comic co-created by Keanu Reeves. Guys, I appreciate the 5-panel box, the collectability and the prestige look to it, about having the window and the way that it's all kind of layered together with the plastic plates, as well as having no twisty ties in the end, making the whole packaging ordeal a much more smoother and intuitive experience. But I'm not sure how I feel about the fact that at the front you put created by Keanu Reeves, and yet it's actually co-created, co-written by him, along with one other writer, and then of course the illustrator for the comic. I appreciate that comic panels are there on the back to kind of give you a taste of what it's all about. But I do feel a little weird that the Keanu's name is just so bold there, which I understand from a business standpoint. You got to sell the figure, but I mean, we can already kind of tell that this is Keanu Reeves. I mean, just look at that head and look at the way that he's designed inside of the comic. The comic of which is based on the premise of this half god, half mortal being named B, simply just named B, because he's Berserker, B for short. And after living for like hundreds of thousands of years, he finally finds himself going on these very dangerous, ultra-violent missions that are just too chaotic for one sole person or even a group of people to take on for the US government. So he decides to take up the job in exchange for knowledge of his origins and hopefully a way to figure out how to finally die and rest in peace, because he's just tired of it. He's just tired of the fact that he really cannot die despite all the extremities that he's gone through. So pretty much immortal John Wick. That's I saw somebody already make that comment online, and I thought to myself, yep, that's kind of what you really do need to know. He's pretty much invincible John Wick. And now it's looking like we're getting a form of an extension for that through the means of B from BRZRKR in McFarlane Toys form. And that's why I thought to myself, okay, $50, but I am seeing quite an awful lot of value jam-packed into that collectible packaging. And despite being a Walmart exclusive, there was just something about it when those pre-orders went live for that morning, apart from some other Walmart Con exclusives on the other side of the spectrum with Marvel Legends, like those Spidey figs. I thought to myself, you know what, let me kind of bundle all these guys together and see exactly what I can kind of be in store for should DC be extradited from McFarlane Toys and they take on some much more unique kind of releases or special occasion kind of collector's items such as this, to see if maybe McFarlane Toys is a brand that kind of made an imprint on me even without the DC license. And I feel like a good stepping stone for that would have to be with this B figure, which is of course still modeled in that 7-inch scale format. It is of course modeled after the man, the myth, the legend, Keanu Reeves. And frankly, I feel like that's probably the first thing to tackle head on here, since we're not dealing with a Batman character or a DC character. This is a, technically speaking, much more original character, but it's still utilizing a very, very heavy likeness on an actor, personality that we're all too familiar with, which is Keanu Reeves. And that's the main talking point that people are going to have should they see this up on the shelf, or let alone in stores when they're picking it up at Walmart. So tackling that head sculpt, yeah, it's unabashed Keanu Reeves with the long hair, the beard, the overall John Wick aesthetic. And there's a part of me that kind of does wish that we would start to deviate away from that likeness, because it's very difficult to either not see John Wick or at the very, very most another figure that was, or at least another video game character that was then turned into a McFarlane Toys figure when they had the license. And that was Cyberpunk in the form of Johnny Silverhand. So this is not necessarily the first time that McFarlane Toys has made a Keanu Reeves figure. There's been a form of a collaboration between the two of them before in the form of a Johnny Silverhand figure. And that one was kind of a gray area, considering that, yeah, you have the long hair, you have the beard, but the main thing that kind of detracted from a very solid Keanu likeness would have to be that he was wearing the glasses in that incarnation. So it was kind of difficult to tell whether or not they really nailed the likeness. Here, however, since they're basing it out of something that's a little less photorealistic, because when you play Cyberpunk, you can definitely see that you're dealing with a photorealistic Keanu Reeves in the form of Johnny Silverhand. Here, it's much more, I don't want to say cartoony, but it's got that comic book aesthetic. It's got that likeness to Keanu Reeves, while at the same time still appearing very illustrative, very art designed as far as the exaggerated proportions or the very saturated look to the colors that were applied here. So obviously dealing with the hair and dealing with the actual face applications here, yeah, you can tell that the likeness is there, but they're not going for photorealistic, and I feel like this time they were able to really nail the head sculpt just a little bit better. Now, to be frank though, once you move past the Keanu likeness, then you're dealing with a very militaristic tactical suit that is pretty, for lack of a better term, straightforward. It's definitely within McFarlane's wheelhouse as far as all the belts and the patches and the cargo aesthetic, as far as the creases on the pants, the very, like I said, militaristic style with the buckles and the way that all the armaments are applied to the vest, the bulletproof vest that you got going on right here. At the same time though, I do like the actual design that they cater to for the character, but that's mostly a compliment on the design of the character within the comics that McFarlane was able to extrapolate here, because I noticed that, sure, he's got the bulletproof stuff and some of the tactical gear around the pants, but he's not necessarily donning a huge assortment of armor for protection, because he knows that he technically cannot die. So I like that he's got the bulletproof vest, but then he's just got very clear, straightforward, regular black shirt right underneath that with a couple of straps here on the forearms. I can't remember exactly what the actual lore explanation behind these straps and the things on the wrists are necessarily, but as far as just like the minimalist approach to armoring to make sure that he's fully protected, I like that there's a lore explanation behind that, considering that he's half god, half mortal. So I do like that attention to detail, and McFarlane was able to respect that to a certain degree, but at the same time, like I said, it's nothing necessarily all that terribly unique for McFarlane to be able to handle, considering that, like I said, the paneling as far as the sculpting for the vest on both the front and the back, the color coordination for the buckles, like I said, the pouches where he probably has an awful lot of his ammo, as well as, of course, the buckles and the holsters around the pants, the creases for said pants, the boots, of course, the little bit of laces that you kind of make out there towards the bottom and then a little bit in the center. It's pretty much very McFarlane 101. So it's not necessarily bad, but it's also nothing that's reinventing the wheel for McFarlane to be able to pump out in mass, considering that we've dealt with certain aspects and little details about this body before, specifically around the way that everything's just kind of tooled together. Ever so often when I kind of futz and finagle with the figure, I kind of get this vibe from the way that the arms feel and the way that the legs feel that kind of harken back a little bit to early 2020, 2021 days with the DC Multiverse science, specifically with characters like Red Hood. Ever so often when I feel like the boots and the pants and a little bit of the arms, it makes me think of some of those older figures, which is not bad inherently, but it's also not great considering how much of a development and how much progress we really made within that line, that it kind of makes me wish that we could have had something just a little bit more solid made for a character who's probably getting exposed to certain people, certain, clients, certain fans for the very first time through McFarlane Toys form. I'm willing to bet, much like myself, people who didn't know exactly about Keanu Reeves making a comic book prior to McFarlane announcing that they were collaborating on an action figure, they probably heard the term Boom Studios as far as a distributor, but we also have to keep in mind that McFarlane always mentions that, and I'm kind of paraphrasing one of his quotes here, he doesn't care how you get in the house. You can use the window, you can use the door, as long as you get in. And he's always talking about Spawn in that manner, that he doesn't care whether you read the comic or you watched the show or you saw the movie from 1997 or you pick up the figures. And that's kind of like your onboarding process for getting into Spawn as a character. He doesn't care. It doesn't have to be the comics. He even likes it when he just collect the figures. He appreciates the fact that you're picking that up. I feel like B from BRZRKR should be kind of treated the same way, so I kind of wish that maybe we could have had something going on a little bit as far as the quality applied to the body. I love the head sculpt, but the rest of the body is pretty standard if I were to say, as far as the way everything's just kind of assembled. To show you guys what I mean, let's cover the articulation. The head is able to rotate the full 360 even with the hairpiece there towards the back. It thankfully does not really intrude all that much. The tilting, on the other hand, does kind of get a little bit in the way, especially when you kind of tilt the head upwards like so. It just stops dead in its tracks right there on the neckline. But then tilting downwards is a bit more favorable, as well as slight nudging side to side. The arms, and frankly this is exactly where we get to our first talking point here very early on during the articulation phase. The arms, you can see, are very movable. They're very mobile and pretty flexible because they're definitely able to rotate the full 360 no problem, as well as extend on over to the sides via the hinge for the dumbbell joint on the inside. But then you'll notice that the washers are flexing and kind of moving about in a butterfly shrugging motion very, very freely. Now, obviously, if you guys have either already previewed this figure from some other reviews or happen to own the figure yourself, you know exactly why these arms are so flexible and so loose. Yes, I understand that there's an accessory-driven explanation as to why this is. I still think that the joint itself should be a little tighter. I know that they probably kind of filed it to be a little smaller to make the functionality of the accessories included a bit more favorable and probably a much more intuitive process. But then when it comes to articulation, you get this trade-off where things are kind of on the loose side when it comes to the top arm joints. And trust me, it unfortunately gets a little worse when regarding these joints. It gets a little worse later down the line when I'll get to that part. But for the time being, you do have bicep joints right underneath that can fully rotate 360. 2 elbow joints that should be able to bend all the way up. But I feel like the way that they're kind of designed, unfortunately, I noticed this as I kind of futzed with them just a little bit more. I did come to the conclusion that they're designed and placed in a way where, like I said, it kind of harkens back to some of those older figures from 2020 and 2021 McFarlane, where I don't know what it is, but the placement kind of causes for only one joint at the elbow to bend and not the other. So you can either bend the lower one like so, or you can bend the upper one a little higher, and then the lower one you can bend slightly but not fully. Comes into contact with the biceps. So you can see right there that you should be able to bend things. It's almost like maybe the elbow joint in and of itself was designed to be a bit shorter, and therefore it's kind of contrasting, kind of crunching everything together here in a way that should allow better flexibility, but in turn it does not. And much like those older figures, we have ball joints for the wrist that allow the hand to technically rotate the full 360, as well as being able to bend inwards and outwards no problems. Thankfully, there's no kind of like gauntlets or extra pieces that get in the way of that. But on the contrary, we then have the torso joints that have this bulletproof vest slightly kind of encapsulating the entirety of this joint right here. Now, that's technically speaking, it's an issue for now. It's definitely not going to be an issue later on when we kind of showcase one of the hidden quote-unquote features about this figure that, don't get me wrong, I do fully appreciate. Like I said, we're talking about trade-offs here, so the only caveat that you kind of have to take with the good would have to be that the mid-torso articulation is slightly limited. You can kind of crunch upwards. Actually, you can crunch upwards very much more favorably than being able to crunch inwards like so. Crunching inwards, probably because of the bulk of these pouches right here, doesn't allow full flexibility as one would want, but extending towards the back is actually pretty good. You can kind of see a little bit of the undershirt right underneath right there with some added features, as I kind of foreshadowed before. But crunching on the obliques is also pretty decent right there. As far as the waist, you can definitely rotate the full 360 and allow better flexibility in the different directions and degrees right about right there. In terms of a mid-torso swivel, well, like I said, we'll get to that later on. I was worried about the top legs considering this very hefty diaper piece that's kind of, like I said, coming with all these like buckles and straps and armaments, but thankfully it still allows the top legs to flex about that much up, so a decent amount, and then extending towards the back is surprisingly pretty good considering that there's a little bit of diaperish right there in terms of the ass piece, but at least able to flex a little more than I was anticipating. So it's able to go towards the back about that far, right about right there, and then extending towards the sides can almost crunch in and of itself at an 180-degree angle right about right there. And he kind of needs to be in order to be able to move fast. The two knee joints can definitely bend all the way up like so. Just be careful of pinching because it's already happened a couple of times to me. Again, kind of speaking a little bit to that robustness of classic 2020, 2021 McFarlane figures. And if that wasn't enough, you also got the ball joints at the ankles that, like I said, it's giving me some major original Three Jokers Red Hood vibes as far as the assembly of all this happening right here. And lo and behold, there was a few occasions of pinching when it came to me moving these things about, as far as bending the foot upwards and downwards and rotating them in 360 motion, as well as slight pivoting inwards and outwards. And then a little forward here, you of course have the toes that are fully able to flex at a 90-degree angle higher up right there. So the articulation, it's not bad, but like I said, much like the design and the little attentions to the detail, there's a couple of things that do work and do kind of stand out, but the grand picture of the design for B here, despite looking, I guess you could say, a little bold inside of the comics, in McFarlane Toys form, the design as well as the articulation, it's not necessarily reinventing or bringing anything new, but at the same time, it's not necessarily betraying its classic tropes. So right now we got to find a reason to justify that $50 price tag and the Walmart exclusivity, because those are pretty big shoes to fill for McFarlane to kind of really indulge in this collaboration. So now we gotta talk about the accessories. We got hands. Let's talk hands. Now, I'm a little bummed about the actual inclusion of the hands because by default, he's got these two symmetrical trigger hands. And naturally, considering that B is working for the government on these very ultra-violent and chaotic missions that are too dangerous for anyone to take on, he's gonna be dealing with firearms. So by default, he's got the trigger hands, and I do like the respect to that. On the side here, you are gonna have symmetrical fisted hands for both the left and the right. So you do have that going on right there. And then only one other kind of gripping, cylindrically gripping, if that's even a word, left hand. I kind of wish that maybe they could have done something else for the right hand to be included here, that way we have an even number of hands here, so we only got 5 as opposed to maybe 6 or an additional pair. But here's the deal, that's what we got going on for hands. Now let's talk arms. You thought that I was going to be talking major amount of shit, but honestly, this is where things get a little bit more alleviated. He's got an extra pair of arms, not just hands. We also got bonus arms. And these arms are more or less identical to the ones that he's got going on by default, except these are completely battle damaged, scarred, ravaged, bloody, gory, and I'm loving the detail. I actually love the paint applications they utilized for the blood effects in and of themselves. The gore effects are kind of here and there. They don't really add too much, but it's really about the blood that really sells the sculpting of the actual tears of the fabric for the cloth sleeves going on right there, as well as, like I said, a few of the tendons and the gashes happening on the skin. By themselves, they would be okay, but to me, what really sells it is the actual hue and the deepening of the red, kind of fluctuating between a brighter red to like a darker, dried up blood red. That really works for me. That's where I'm thinking to myself, okay, whoever was in charge of the paint apps, give them a raise, because this to me is quintessential blood. There's something about blood happening in either comics or games or even movies where you can either go way too bright or way too dark, and it kind of does have this weird cognitive dissonance towards me as a viewer. So when you're able to strike a perfect balance of this kind of red right here, I'm sorry, but I have to give it its respect, its credit, its due. So I really love that they were able to apply that to the arms, as well as the straps that he's got going on the forearms, and then of course the bloody fists, because he's naturally going to be beating up enemies to a pulp with them. However, this brings us to that problem I foreshadowed before about the looseness of the arms, because naturally swapping out the arms is pretty self-explanatory. Of course, there's that dumbbell designed to the joint, and so all you have to really do is give a very firm tug on said arms. Doing so will also allow the shoulder butterfly joint, the kind of filler washer here, to be removed, so just hold on to that. Take the corresponding arm, which in this case would be the right, and honestly I'm kind of glad that I'm doing the right one, because this probably showcases the problem a little bit more so than the left. Fit the washer back in, take the, like I said, the corresponding arm and fit it back into its socket, pop it in, There you go. Makes it very firm. And it's funny because you hear that popping and think to yourself, oh, that's robust. That's definitely going to fit pretty nicely. Yeah.
Brother,
Oh, that's kind of gross. You guys have seen this? Yeah. This is arguably, and thankfully, things get kind of better from here. This is probably the figure's lowest point, would have to be the swappable arms, because the reason for why it hurts so much is because as much as I love the gory effects of the battle damage on them, I'm willing to kind of sacrifice a little bit of that attention to the paint apps and the detail if it at least means for the joints when you pop them in to at least stay in place when it comes to posability, which arguably they replicate the exact same joints, or as far as the elbow joints are still a little bit problematic as far as bending them inwards, but the wrist joints, the bicep, and the shoulder should also be pretty much identical to that of the standard arms. But it kind of becomes an issue when the arm is just so loose, like you see before you're here. I mean, sure, you're getting an incredible amount of butterfly and shrugging motion, but when this starts to happen, we got an issue. Like I mentioned before, the left one doesn't have that big of a problem. You see that it's able to at least stay in certain spots as far as the 360 motion without being as loose or as free-willing as the right one. But man, oh man, yeah, look at this. Turning into a goddamn rock'em sock'em robot. I gotta be honest, this hopefully is just an isolated incident on my part, but at the same time, considering that it's on the secondary set of arms that are the whole purpose for them to be here is to be swapped for the standard non-battle damage ones, I'm thinking to myself, I can't shake the feeling that this is probably also present in other people's units. So if by some chance any of you happen to have the BRZRKR B figure that was a Walmart exclusive here, let me know down in the comments if you guys picked it up and have already kind of messed with these secondary arms and swapped them in and out. Are any of them loose by default without any other kind of thing that you managed to do onto them? Because like I said, even from the very first arm swap, we did have this problem kind of present itself. And I'm a little bit bummed about that. But probably not as bummed as the guy whose arm this belonged to. Because while we're still on the subject of arms, he does come with a third arm. Only this time it's meant to be merely just an extra bonus accessory to kind of favor set dressing, so to speak. It's literally just a random dude's arm, because you could tell that the sleeve is sort of militarized. It's kind of looking like he's wearing fatigues. But of course, he's got some really cool, bloody, gory effects there on the stump. And the rest of the arm is not necessarily articulated. It's just one static solid piece, but I do appreciate the fact that you got this kind of bundled in there, so if you want to kind of pose with him holding a dismembered arm, you can do so as well. But arms aren't the only things that you can kind of swap around with this guy. You can also mess around with different face plates and head sculpts, kind of leaning a little bit more towards a modern sensibility that McFarlane has been touching base with the DC Multiverse line. A technique that even I've been kind of taking an interest in as far as the collector's editions with certain characters, where you're able to kind of flip and swap some of the faceplates to give them different expressions as opposed to doing different head sculpts, or in other cases where the seams are going to be a little bit too abrasive and obvious, they do include different head sculpts. Something that's not necessarily new for toy companies, but cool to see that McFarlane is becoming a bit more frequent with. And it's cool that a very special occasion like B here does get that similar style of treatment. So when it comes to the default Keanu Reeves head sculpt with the long hair and the default look, you're also able to swap the faceplate, the default faceplate that he's got going on right there, with a screaming blue-eyed expression right about right there. It's still utilizing the same paint applications as far as the beard and the mouth and the overall likeness to the Keanu Reeves that we got going on in the comic, but this time he's got the blue glowing eyes right there, unleashing the demigod powers. And of course, removing the faceplate is a bit intuitive. All you got to do is just kind of go underneath the chin, give it a firm tug, and thus Okay, I'm sorry. I know that this is nightmare fuel. Something that certain collectors have been dealing with as far as these faceplates for certain characters, but seeing it here in person is a whole new beast. I'll tell you that. I'll tell you what, because holy Jesus Christ. If anything, this is probably more intimidating than having just Keanu Reeves' likeness. They should probably just incorporate this back into the comic. But once you're able to kind of get your shit together from this frightening visual, you then take the faceplates, kind of press it back in via the peg inside there, and just give it a firm press. You kind of have to squeeze a little bit of the bald kind of top piece here of the faceplate and kind of slide it into the hairline for the overall hair sculpt, fit it firmly in place, snug and tight, and there you have the brand new facial expression. And if anything, the Keanu Reeves likeness here, or at least the Keanu Reeves head design, is pretty much beckoning for that style of faceplate removal, considering that you have the hair being able to kind of mask a bit of the seams, as opposed to a bald character or some kind of robotic character that has a smoothed over hairline that you're not going to be able to kind of disguise or tuck away neatly. However, when it comes to getting rid of the hairline and going for a much more battle damage approach, you can then swap in the entirety of the head sculpt for one of these two extra heads right over here. One is a bit more, for lack of a better term, f***ed up than the other one, because you got this one right here where he's got a much more neutral expression to his face. He's got no blue glowing eyes, but he does have an awful lot of battle damage as far as having the majority of his hair pretty much getting fried off, as well as the bloody decals on one of his cheeks and the whole right side of his head right there, complete with very gory and splotchy detail right there that I truly do appreciate. But I am a little concerned about the remaining hair strands that you do have going on over here. It's not as solid or kept together as the neutral hair sculpt for the default head, so you do have to be a little bit careful with these strands, because I do feel like they could be a little prone to breaking. However, if you want to go for an even much more screwed up style to his overall battle damage look, you also got this other head sculpt, and not only do you have even more battle damage with the scrapes, the blood, and even more hair just completely burned off, but he also has the grimace with the exposed teeth, the much more angry expression, the blue glowing eyes for his powers, and if anything, this hair, or at least this head sculpt, not only does away with the hair, but this also exposes a few extra bloody details on the neck. You can see that a few more gashes were applied to one of the sides of the neck that you can only really see with this head sculpt right here. So it's cool that it's managing to achieve this cohesive sort of transformative way to the figure that I'm a huge sucker for. As you guys have been kind of knowing from the beginning of this channel, and even some pre-existing channels, for those of you who have been here for the long game, you know, some of my, as kids like to call it these days, the OGs. You guys know that one of my favorite figures of all time was the Toy Biz 2002 Tobey Maguire wrestler suit Spidey, where you're able to kind of swap pieces in and out, and you're able to transform him from his wrestler suit style from that opening bit of the movie during his match against Bonesaw McGraw to then becoming the traditional Spidey figure with the regular costume. So taking that similar approach and applying it here with the different faceplates, head sculpts, the different arms, was already something that was kind of tickling my fancy. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, cool. But then taking another peek at some of those promo shots that were up on the Walmart site, as well as McFarlane Toys' social media, I then remembered, I saw it before, but then I kind of like re-remembered that there's an added feature kind of hidden away underneath the surface, feeding ever more into the whole concept of being able to find hidden features by swapping out parts, just like I mentioned with the wrestler suit Spidey, removing any of the head sculpts and just kind of leaving the neck a little bare here, as well as subsequently removing the arms and even the washers, just for the sake of making things a little bit more intuitive and comfortable. You then get, of course, the bare torso piece right about right here, but you'll notice that the vest is not necessarily glued on or adhered to the torso, and that's because you can technically remove it. It is a little tough to remove. It's kind of stacked and snug right up in there. However, there are forms of like cutaways here around the ends of the pouches from the front. So if you kind of extend it, and I'm kind of glad that they did this, because I feel like if this had been one whole solid piece, it would have gotten in the way and would have been very detrimental to the point where it might have caused some wear and tear later down the line through constant exchanges of being able to remove this in and out, in and out, in and out. And so that would have caused a problem over time. So it's good to see that they managed to create these tiny little slits to make the whole thing a bit more, like I said, intuitive and a much more straightforward process. But if you slowly kind of, tug away at the bulletproof cargo vest that he's got going on right here, and just give it a firm tug, you'll then notice that this will expose the undershirt right here, which then in turn gives us even more battle damage upon the black sleeved shirt right upon right here. And you'll notice that, of course, they continue the cool bloody gore effects on the gashes there on the front and even on the back, to the point where they're even exposing just a little bit of the spine there. And frankly, I'll just take the head sculpt here without the glowing eyes, but still with a little bit of the battle ravageness happening on the hair as well as the face. And bam, we got a battle damaged bee ready for battle there, or rather ready to at least finish the fight, with an awful lot of bloody, disgusting effects happening on the torso, the arms, and everything in between. And yeah, this is actually kind of cool that we are able to go from a fully armorized, decked out Keanu Reeves in the form of B from BRZRKR to then looking like this, like he's just been put through the ringer, a la Paul Verhoeven's movies. So this is awesome. This is actually something that I can thoroughly appreciate when it comes to certain one-offs for certain characters that McFarlane is willing to tackle here. And even more so, being able to still tuck away certain little details that makes playing around with the figure and kind of swapping pieces in and out a much more worthwhile experience, and truly where the money comes out of. Because lo and behold, swapping the arms, the different head sculpts, face plates, and even revealing a little bit of the battle damage tucked away on the shirt here is not all. You have this very gaping, massive wound hole, if you want to call it that, right here on his left side of his abdomen. And that's because he comes with this bloodied up dagger, which is a pretty straightforward dagger in terms of sculpt and paint applications. Even though one of the paint applications that I can thoroughly appreciate is once again that dried out, much darker maroon blood coating the busy side of the blade. But what's really awesome is that you can take this knife and stick it into said gaping wound. Basically, you take the curved side of the blade and have it be facing his right side, so you have the much longer end kind of going towards his left side, and that's the direction, or rather the orientation, that you have to stick the knife into him. And eventually you'll get it right. It's like a USB stick. You know, there's only one real way to put it in. And there you have the knife just flat out sticking out of his abdomen, but still managing to carry on like a goddamn Terminator. So that's a really cool effect. I really dig that. It's pretty niche, but at the same time, it's something that, again, it's one of those little details that McFarlane didn't necessarily have to do, but somewhere down the line, whether it be coming from Todd himself, or hell, even Keanu Reeves, maybe during some form of collaboration, was like, would it be cool if he had like a dagger sticking out of his abdomen, and you can the person playing with the toy can actually do that. And then Todd was like, you know what, Keanu, that's actually a really cool idea. That's really cool. And I would say if we can just get one of the knives that I already kind of sculpted for a different figure, we could definitely put it in there. Oh, yeah, man. Yeah, I think we do. Put it in there. And that's pretty much how the whole meeting went down. Speaking of other weapons that you can put on his person, would have to be this pretty standard pistol. So he does come with this. And even though it can go into either one of his trigger hands and naturally can fit the index finger into the trigger to be able to fit in there naturally, much more naturally than the dagger, because apart from the gaping wound hole he's got on his torso, he technically can hold the dagger in either of those holding hands from the neutral arms right here, the non-battle damaged ones, but unfortunately they're sculpted to primarily hold guns. So even though the dagger will fit in there, you're gonna have the index finger kind of extended in a awkward state. So naturally, I think an awful lot of collectors are going to end up going for this look right here when it comes to the dagger, but at least you won't necessarily have all that much of a problem with the pistol here, because it can go into either of his trigger hands or inside of the holster that he's got on his left thigh right here. It's naturally the only real weapon that you can technically house on the body of the figure, because when it comes to the rest of the armaments that he comes with, you're not really going to be able to sport it on him, whether it be with his very barren look that he's got going on right here, or when his fully stacked up battle armor design, as far as the neutral arms or even the one with the vest. Which is why I thought to myself, it would have been really cool if maybe there was a way to kind of incorporate something, some kind of mass holster, a very large one, to be able to be clipped here at the back of the rubberized armor vest, because this whole section here is filled with an awful lot of negative space that it would have been cool to include, speaking of cool, would have been nice to include something that can carry an awful lot of the guns that he's got packed in. And guns, he's got aplenty. He is bundled with an awful lot of joyous amounts of weaponry, from machine guns to rifles, LMGs, semi-auto. I don't know what my terminology is as far as guns are concerned. And trust me, in 3, 2, 1, I'm gonna have 1 or 2 gun bros going into the comment section correcting me as far as what it is that he truly does have included inside of the box. I gotta be honest, I don't really care. As long as it looks cool, it's truly what it really matters. And practically an awful lot of the weaponry that is housed within the box inside of the plastic tray could be fitted into either of his trigger hands, and naturally he's gonna look pretty badass, ready for battle in any kind of pose you put him in, whether it be in this battle damage state or in his neutral state from the get-go. The only caveats to point out is probably the one that you were able to discern right from the get-go. As soon as you probably laid eyes on some of these guns, some of these rifles, is that yes, the vast majority, in fact probably all of them, even down to the generic pistol that I just kind of showcased pretty early on to be able to be put into the holster, are naturally taken from an awful lot of the munitions packs that McFarlane Toys has already created to be sold separately in the form of munitions pack 1 and 2. I don't think that there were any taken from 3. I could be wrong about that, but I feel like 3 has like the most kind of out there, unorthodox style to guns that kind of favor much more alien creatures or very, fantastical looking designs, characters, as far as stuff pulled from like the DC universe, etc. When it comes to the munitions pack for 1 and 2, that's where you get your more grounded weapons, as far as AK-47s, grenade launchers, rocket launchers, Tommy guns, pistols, rifles, magnums, etc. And yes, it is a little strange to have said munitions pack inclusions be simply just sort of copied and pasted to be included with BRZRKR B here. It was a little bit of a bummer to see that there was no specific weapon that's very exclusive to this whole bundle deal that you get within this release. But at the same time, there's only one tiny little pass I'm willing to give McFarlane here, and that is that I've kind of skimmed through a few of those panels, one of which you can actually preview on the back of the packaging for the figure, and you'll notice that an awful lot of the guns he even uses in the comic in and of itself are pretty generic looking as well. They just look like very standard rifles, machine guns, etc. So I feel like this is kind of a good gateway, or an excusable gateway for McFarlane to simply just be like, well, I already made the munitions pack, why bother recasting molds if they just looked pretty standard? And up until the point where maybe B does get himself a very specific weapon that has a very unique design later down the line in the storyline for the comics, then maybe that's where we can definitely call McFarlane out for not actually sculpting a brand new weapon to fit that mold. And if you were to just take something like pretty generic looking, like the ones that were included here, and bundle in with like a secondary release of B here, where he finally gets a different gun in the comics, then that's where we definitely need to start shooting some criticism. But up until that point, I feel like this is a pretty business savvy move to just take pre-existing munition releases and just kind of pack it in here. And to play devil's advocate, my second point would be that there might still be that occasional collector who hasn't gotten the munitions pack. The only reason why I have munitions pack 1 and 2 is because I got deals on them. The first one, I used a McFarlane Toys rewards coupon to get it like $20 off, so I literally only paid like $10 for munitions pack 1, and I think it was during like a Christmas sale or some kind. And then literally around the same time the following year, I went to one of my local collectible shops here in the Inland Empire in the Orange County, Mike's Toys and Stuff, and he had a Black Friday sale where if you bought like a certain amount of figures, you get another little addition for like 50% off within the McFarlane Toys section. And though I didn't see any figures specifically that I wanted, I saw the munitions pack number 2 for half off, and I took it home with me. That's the only reason why. At full price, I probably still would not have the munitions pack, and if that version of the timeline had come to pass, this would have been my first exposure to any kind of those weapons that came in the munitions pack, and I have to assume that there's at least going to be another collector out there who probably never picked up any of the munitions pack, and this is going to be their way to have some of those inclusions, have some of those guns, those weapons, those releases, bundled in with then a full-on 7-inch figure that even comes with its own assortment of accessories and features. And that's only going to sweeten the deal for them. It's going to be that nice little cherry on top of that sundae that is this entire release, or at least it's going to be doing a better job of kind of conveying that cherry, as opposed to the other last included features, which would have to be the standard McFarlane Toys circular base here with the BRZRKR logo on top of it, the trading card with a brief bio of the character B from the comic, as well as a look of the cover right there on the other side, which unfortunately came a little warped. I have a little bit of criticism, which, again, it doesn't make sense because considering the very prestige collector's approach to the packaging, I don't understand why my card came out so warped and creased here towards the corners. So that's kind of disappointing to see, especially if I was to be one of the collectors of the trading cards and cared more for them. I would be a little annoyed by this, McFarlane. Just letting you know in advance here to kind of be careful when it comes to, packaging these things in. And lastly, something that I forgot that they were going to do is making BRZRKR B here technically speaking, a McFarlane Toys Phygital. So not only do you get all this included, but you also get a code to download BRZRKR B into your McFarlane Toys digital collection. So not only do you get the physical version, but also a digital version of Keanu Reeves ready for battle to be put into your NFT collection from McFarlane Toys over on that environment. Being able to, redeem your code, blow him up, scaling, rotate him. All of my things that I've already remarked as far as the McFarlane Toys digital front of things, being able to articulate the figures or move them about, put them in different poses, things like that, or the approach to, or the mindset to the collectability factor as far as like maybe incentives for like different skins or bundle pieces to be able to build a figure with a certain set of wave inclusions. All those commentaries that I've already made on McFarlane Toys Digital still stand. And if anything, they're mildly reinforced because when I redeemed my code for B here, I was thinking to myself, okay, so he's going to look like he does here. To a certain extent, he does, but at the same time, the language utilized and the communication is still a little iffy. Because when I redeemed this code, I got the little notification saying that I got the rocket launcher variant of BRZRKR B. So it's this version of BRZRKR with a rocket launch, holding a rocket launcher, and that's the icon that I'm shown. But when I then download the digital figure into my environment and blow him up, it's B with glowing eyes, no rocket launcher, and just two other guns, a pistol and what appears to be an SMG of some kind. I don't know, it's some kind of machine gun. And I'm like, where's the rocket launcher? This thing is titled as Rocket Launcher B. Where's the rocket launcher? The icon shows him with the rocket launcher, but when I actually move the Phygital about in my environment, he's not posed that way. And that's, again, feeding into the criticism, the critique that I've had with MTD is that I want to be able to articulate the figure, move the limbs about so that maybe he can hold the rocket launcher in one pose or hold a different gun the next, especially when you're paying, like a premium price of $50 for a collector set such as this. I think there should be an incentive there to at least focus on the digital part right there just as badly as the physical, because trust me, when you are dealing with so many physical goodies such as this, including swappable arms, you can kind of guess exactly where I'm going to be leaning towards in terms of playability factor. It's going to be the physical. Though it's not necessarily a bad move to bundle in the Phygital with this version because, again, so many people are going to be exposed to this property, to this comic, to this character through the McFarlane Toys physical iteration of an action figure. Just like he talks about with Spawn, and I kind of iterated on this a little bit before. The gateway, the way to get into the house can vary from person to person. They might use the back door, the front door, the window, the gate. As long as they get into the house, that's truly what's important. But you also have to consider what they're going to see when they're inside the house. And sometimes that you never really get a second chance at a first impression. I mean, it's kind of written right there. And I feel like if that first impression that is really important for you includes the digital aspect of things, then we also need to take into consideration that aspect just as badly as you do with the physical stuff. For me personally, I'm sorry, but I think $50 is a pretty good deal for what you're getting right here. It's really about the character that I think could be the subject for debate as far as whether or not this is a character that truly sells, because I feel like he was selling a good amount at the beginning, but now once people have gotten their impressions out there on social media, I am noticing much more Walmart starting to stack up a little bit on B on the shelf. And I'm kind of hoping that this guy moves a little bit more effectively, because knowing that the DC license could potentially be moving on from McFarlane Toys, This is, in my opinion, a good stepping stone to see what McFarlane can do outside of that property, should they tackle other things within the video game space, the comic book space, especially comic books and graphic novels that are not catering to those very pulpy characters from either the Marvel camp or DC, going into the direction of maybe like Dark Horse, or even within McFarlane's own Image comics with Spawn and even other characters written by his colleagues. I would argue that this is something that could still keep people that were loyal to him through DC Multiverse stay loyal to the McFarlane Toys brand, but it's gonna take some elbow grease from both camps. So not just from the fans to be willing to give certain things a chance, but also from McFarlane to be able to listen to some of the criticisms, some of which I have already voiced as far as the digital aspect of things. Just as long as we're progressing a little forward when it comes to the technologies and the methods to assembling and tooling figures. Because like I said, the looseness of that arm, I understand why it's there. It's because of the swappable feature, but at the same time, seeing this thing bob and weave like it does right here, being very, very loose, is not a good look. And if you want this figure to, or any other future incarnations of B to sell and do a little bit better within the viewpoint of the collector, we can't be having things like this happening too frequently. You know, it's something that definitely has to be nipped in the bud as soon as possible. But for having, like I said, my first exposure to the character of B in the form of a pretty deluxe Walmart exclusive McFarlane Toys action figure, it's not bad, and therefore gives a pretty solid 7 out of 10 from me. One that still kind of deserves a little bit of attention from the collective, even if they're not going to pick it up at full price. I don't blame anyone for moving past it at the full $50, but once it goes down to like maybe 40, 35 in the form of like a clearance or a sale or some kind of bundle deal, or if maybe it moves out of Walmart exclusivity and onto the McFarlane Toy Store, like I said, keep an eye out for some form of sale or some form of redemption of your rewards points to be able to utilize on it, or maybe some kind of like customer appreciation deal that they got going on per month where you get free shipping or you get a certain discount if you bundle certain things in some manner. I would say B would not be a regretful purchase in that decorum, in that sense. Let me know down below, outside of DC Multiverse, what would McFarlane Toys need to put out to keep you as a loyal customer and as a collector of McFarlane Toys? Should they not be able to make any more Batmans, any more Supermans, a Wonder Woman, or any of those characters that you truly do love from the DC universe? So in the form of maybe the Mortal Kombat series that they got cooking up right now, or something that is kind of starting to make the rounds in the form of B from BRZRKR here, at least you got yourself a form of custom to be able to make into a John Wick of some sorts. And what would McFarlane be able to kind of take away from the criticisms and the responses and the feedback to a figure such as B here? Because should they iterate on a second release with like different features, different weaponry, different accessories, they're definitely gonna have to listen to that feedback, because it looks like they got a competitor working kind of similarly in that space coming up here in the form of Mafex, delivering on their own B from BRZRKR. One that seems to look a little bit more comic accurate, complete with like much more wavy locks, accessories, pouches, the like. So that's definitely something that McFarlane will probably have to keep their ear to the ground if they're going to be continuing with this license. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comment section below. And while you guys are down there, thumbs up the video if you enjoyed it, thumbs down if you did not. And as always, stay humble and take care. Peace out.